This is where the disciples gathered. This is where they lived together. They worked together for a period of about 3 years. And this is a good opportunity for us to talk about discipleship, because when the Lord came, He didn't just come and do what many of us do in the Western culture. And I'm not talking about brand new church. I'm not talking about even churches in America. I'm talking about Western culture. We think discipleship can be done 1 time a week, 2 times a week. We go through a class of 12 weeks. Now you're a disciple. That's not biblical discipleship. Discipleship is a way of life. It was called being a Talmud, a Talmudim. People were learners. They were followers. If you'll recall in Matthew chapter 11, the Lord said, "Come unto me, all you that labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest." You remember that? So you're familiar with that. Well, many times this is used at funerals. It's used when people are going through exhaustion. That actually has nothing to do with that passage. The phrase, "take my yoke upon you," is idiomatic. We know what idioms are. Idioms are expressions that communicate to a particular culture or situation. When I was pastor at First Baptist San Diego, California, I would often forget to begin with, the first year that I was there, that I was in a place that was totally a different culture than what I came up with. And so one day the group was looking at me like some of you have looked at me, perplexed, and thinking, where's he going with this? And so I said to them, "You're looking at me like a calf looking at a new gate." That didn't communicate at all, because you see, most of them had never actually seen a real calf. They had certainly not observed a calf. They had not dealt with them to know that if you fix a new fence, that a new calf and its mother will stand there and look at that thing for half a day trying to figure out how to get through it. And so I temporarily went farther insane and said, what I mean is a deer looking at a headlight. Well, that's an idiom. I used 2 idioms there. That communicates with people in a certain culture that know what that means, but anybody else doesn't. Jesus often spoke in idiomatic language. And when He said, "take my yoke upon you," that was equivalent to saying, "enroll in my school." You see, discipleship is about learning. It's about growing. It's about discipline. It's about exercise. It's about not just hearing and gaining knowledge, but putting that into a life. The word in the Greek text for obey is to listen. It's akouo, where we get our word acoustics, to listen and submit. It's the idea of obedience. That is, we hear it and then we put it into practice. We come under the authority of that. And so when He said, "enroll in my school," then He immediately, it makes sense, "and learn of me." Not learn all the things I'm telling you to do, but learn about who I am. And then He said, "you'll find rest for your souls." Why? Because my teaching is easy and my burden is light. The Apostle John picked up on that and said in his writings, in the book of 1 John, that the Lord's commandments are not grievous. They're not burdensome. That doesn't mean they're not difficult, but it means that God is walking right with us. He's in the yoke with us. He is with us all the way. So discipleship is relational. It's about a relationship with Jesus. It's not just about serving, doing. It's about walking with Him, knowing Him, loving Him, and out of that relationship, the fellowship comes that helps us to walk with Him day by day. Now, why am I telling you that? Because it relates to this place. Remember, we are now beginning to turn our hearts after today. We're going to go north tomorrow, but then we're going to continually be turning our hearts toward Jerusalem. Jesus was always doing that. He was always turning them toward Jerusalem and saying, when we get to the right place, I'm going to be offered up as a sacrifice. I'm going to die. I'm going to be raised. The Son of Man will be raised. If they destroy this temple, I'll raise it up in 3 days. And so he was always telling them, and evidently while he was here, according to the Scriptures, he said, after I go to Jerusalem, I die as the substitutionary atonement for sin, when I'm going to rise from the dead, and I want to meet you back here. And so that's why the angel said, go and meet Jesus where he said to meet him in the Galilee. So the disciples came back here. Why did he bring them back here? I believe it's because of this aspect. And the reason I believe this so strongly is because of what happened in that room where they had Passover. You remember in John chapter 13, they started with chapter 12 and it goes to 13, 14, 15. Chapter 15, I believe, was on the way to the garden. He saw the great clusters of grapes that were up on the temple. That's where he talked about, I am the vine, you are the branches. Then he taught them again in chapter 16. Chapter 17, that great prayer, the prayer of the Lord Jesus, really the Lord's Prayer, where he had the longest prayer recorded that Jesus prayed. And then he went to Gethsemane. But you go back to John chapter 13, and that's where he said, a new commandment I give unto you, that you love one another in the way I love you. I want you to love one another. And by this kind of love, all men will know that you're my disciples. That's a big deal. Is this love relationship with all of us. And we treat one another in a different way than we do others. We are to be good to all men, but especially those of the household of faith, said Saul of Tarsus, the Apostle Paul. So how does all of this work? Well, while they were here, they lived together. They would have lived in an insular compound. They found several of them here. Now, what is an insular compound? An insular compound is a large room. If you go to Mesopotamia, when in the Chaldean culture, Karen and I lived in a Chaldean's home, and when we were in California, we leased from him, and it was 3 families that lived in one house. And each family in that particular setting had a bedroom. But they all lived together, they did life together, they got along together, they fussed together, they did everything, they would fight, make up together, they did all of that, and then they would all sleep in one room. Now that was until they could get the patents that they needed, because it was this Chaldean family that we lived in that had moved out of the 3-bedroom, 1,600 square foot house where they had started, because they had lost everything from Saddam Hussein and had been run out because they were Christians, Orthodox Christians. And so they came there, and while he was there, he was a very smart man, the father was, and so he got the patent on the plastic bags, the All-American Bag Company that produces all the plastic bags that you have at Walmart, grocery stores, anywhere you do. That's a lot of bags. Think about that, the guy who had the patent on that. So they moved to a very large home on top of one of the beautiful mountains that you could have a 360 view, and everybody had their own room, but they still lived in Daddy's house. All of them. And the children had their rooms, and everyone had their own separate rooms. But it was that insular compound where they all ate together, they talked together, they did everything together, and then they went to their rooms and they would sleep together. This is what they did here. They did life together. Discipleship is messy work. It's messy because you have to deal with people's lives, their hurts, their idiosyncrasies, their problems. And nobody here is exempt from problems. We all have them. You've got your quirks. You do. And people, when you're not around, will tell others what they are. And so you're not exempt. I'm not exempt. We all have them. And but you have to get along with one another. And so they live together. Now, that was such a powerful concept that in John chapter 13, at the end of it, after Jesus gave that commandment, follow the storyline. Here's what happened. Jesus said, I'm going away, and Peter immediately said what he did, what I told you about. Everybody else, all these may forsake you, but not I. Before morning you'll deny me 3 times. When the leader of the disciples was told by the Lord himself, you're going to deny me 3 times. Again, the Bible doesn't say this. It's not a director's script. It doesn't say, and the disciples went. It doesn't say, and the disciples were crestfallen, they were upset, they were troubled, but they were. How do we know that? Because of the next verse. Remember, the chapter and verse divisions were not in the original writing. They were put in, the chapter divisions, in the 13th century, 1225. The verse divisions were 300 years later, 1550. And so what I'm telling you is, there is no break there. Chapter 13 and 14, there is no break at chapter 14. Here's what Jesus said immediately. He said, let not your heart be troubled. You trust in God, trust also in me. In my Father's house are many dwelling places. If it were not so, I would have told you. Now listen, the reason I told Peter and you that I'm going away is because if I don't go away and prepare a place for you, I will not be able to come back and get you and take you to where I am, so that where I am, there you may be also. Now Thomas, who was kind of dense at times, he was. Jesus just said this, the way you know where I'm going, you know, and the way you know. Now he said that. Is Jesus ever wrong? The answer is no. He just said, where I'm going, you know, and the way you know. You know what Thomas said? We don't know where you're going. How do we know the way? Jesus had been talking to him about this for 3 years. And so he said, Thomas, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes unto the Father but by me. And then Philip started talking to him. You mentioned the Father. Can you show us the Father? And Jesus said, Philip. When the name gets called twice, it's over. Philip. Have I been so long with you that you don't get it? The one who's seen me has seen the Father, because I and the Father are one. Now, how did that comfort them? Why did that comfort them? Because that brought them back in their mind to the Galilee, not to the press and the crush of Jerusalem and the death of their Lord, but back here to the time when they all lived together, when they ate together, when they fellowshiped together, when they did life together. That's how Jesus comforted them. Why am I telling you this? Is because this is the heart and soul of Christianity. It's a personal relationship with Jesus that is not spasmodic, episodic, even though we have great episodes in our lives. It is moment by moment, hour by hour, day by day, week by week, month by month. Jesus in the morning, Jesus at noontime, Jesus at supper time. Somebody ought to write a song about that. And so this is the whole concept of Christianity in a nutshell. It's a personal relationship and fellowship and walk with God. And this is why the Apostle Paul talked about this walk with God, this walk with God, this walk with God. Why? Because you and I, the moment we come to know God and we come under His leadership and we enroll in His school, then we are, hear me, brand new people. That's why you have a brand new church, is discipleship. And discipleship is not just a single decision. It is a decision that goes on day after day after day, week after week after week. Because the moment you enter into the kingdom of God, the moment you are saved, the moment you're born again, whatever terminology biblically you want to use, it talks about the beginning of a relationship, not the end. That's not the high point. That's the entry point. And so, while you're here, soak it in. And go back and understand that this is what you have been sent here for, is to build your fellowship that is based upon that relationship that all began because of what happened here and what happened in Jerusalem. And then what came back to here. Why was he bringing them back here? Because he was about to go away. In 40 days, he was going to go away. And he wanted to remind them that the most important thing in all of life is their relationship with him. Why? Because every one of them were going to give their life for him. And it needed to be reaffirmed after they saw him alive from the dead.